kilometers.
Wow, that's further than I thought.
Yeah, so when you look at the Shahab 3 at 2,000 kilometers, you bring it in a little bit, and again, you go back to RAF Akatiri, that could be within the target set of the Shahed.
And in fact, it was targeted, as we know.
It was targeted. However, we have information suggesting that that particular drone didn't come from Iran. Now, we don't know. We haven't seen any bomb damage assessment. We haven't seen any forensic evidence of what that drone was. I mean, it could have come from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They do have drone capability, and it is thought that they also have Shahed capability as well. What numbers? Estimated about 2,000, but again, unverified.
When you speak to Western analysts about how many of these they have, how many they can produce, they will tell you that they can manufacture between 200 and 500 a month. The Iranians say it's much more than that. So the figure as to what they're producing is disputed. But in any case, they have a huge stockpile. The evidence is there for all of us to see.
Yeah, it's frightening, the stockpile, if I'm honest. I say that, I don't say that lightly. But let's take a look at what the Shahed is. And what's been really interesting is that you and me have been talking about Shahed 136s for 3 years. I'm getting people asking me questions who have never heard of a Shahed, and it's obviously only because they're now being used on Gulf countries that people are starting to realize what this threat is. Ukrainians have been dealing with it for a long time. But if we look at this, it is a really, really simple system. If one gets shot down and you open it up, you'll find it's remarkably rudimentary. The airframe and engine, it's a delta wing design. It's 3.5 meters long. So it is bigger than you think it is. Powered by a piston engine, a two-stroke piston engine, travels at around 120 miles an hour. So it's not particularly fast. The warhead that it carries is between 20 and 60 kilograms, and that will be based on the range you want it to fly, because the heavier the warhead.
So it's a push propeller. It's what civilian hobbyists might use in light aircraft.
Yeah, super simple.
Really simple. What are the defense chiefs in the Gulf currently facing this threat thinking about, do you think?
So the first thing will be, how much money and how complicated are the air defense systems that are conventional and currently being used to defeat these very low-cost threats like the Shahed? Let's just take a look at a graphic and do a bit of a cost comparison on that. Here we go. So the Iranian Shahed, the prices are actually a little bit higher. It's around 35 to 50,000 for the Shahed. The US Patriot missile system, the PAC-3, which is the latest missile, that's $4 million per interceptor, $4 million. Then you look at the US THAAD system, Terminal High Altitude Air Defense, $13 million a pop. Now, they're obviously designed to take out ballistic missiles, and they will be doing that. And then you've got the UK short-range advanced air-to-air missile. It's called the ASRAM. That's what we've seen the UK Typhoons in Akatiri getting airborne with, and in Qatar, and using that missile. That missile is $250,000 a pop as well. So you can see.
So that's not sustainable. I mean, clearly it's not sustainable. In fact, the EU Commission said this week the Americans don't have enough to supply the region. The Europeans don't. So what is Ukraine going to supply the Gulf countries with to take down the Shaheds?
Well, President Zelensky, he's spoken to his counterparts in the Gulf countries. So UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, and Kuwait. They all reached out to him, by the way, and he's told them that he's prepared to take quote-unquote concrete steps to help them defend their military bases and civilian infrastructure, which I think the Ukrainians are the best in the world to advise on that.
Is it just a kit, or are they going to send people to operate it?
Well, I think, look, the Ukrainians are without doubt the best in the world at this. They've learned on the job, and there are a lot of NATO countries as well that can learn from, not just the Gulf states. So I think it'll be a combination. It's about the technology they're now using. It's about the tactics, training, and procedures. It's about the protocols, and it's about the lessons identified. And that combination, that holistic package, will be absolutely invaluable to the Gulf countries.
And you've been speaking to someone who might indeed travel, or might send some of his own people to help the Gulf countries. Yeah,
let me introduce you to a Special Forces commander. It's called the Typhoon Brigade. It's a drone unit. He's been operating with his teams on the front line. I met him in Kyiv just before Christmas, and he gave me a lot of information about what they're doing. And I think what he had to say from his experience and from other Ukrainian drone commanders' experiences will be, as I say, invaluable to the threat that the Gulf states are currently facing. Let's take a listen.
Ukraine has always been searching for countermeasures, and we found them. It is a low-cost solution that has so far shot down a really large number of the Shahed drones. These are various types of interceptors that are constantly being improved and are highly effective for defense. Quite simply, if you weigh the cost of a Shahed drone against the cost of an interceptor, it is effectively the destruction of an expensive asset with a cheap one.
Can you just describe how the interceptor works?
When we realized that a standard first-person view drone simply isn't capable of destroying a Shahed drone, we began looking for a solution. That led to the creation of the first interceptors. These interceptors have significantly higher speeds than first-person view drones. We also have to account for the fact that the enemy is trying to adapt their tactics, launching Shahed drones at higher altitudes, for example. We also still see a wide variety of low-altitude deployments as well. We have developed a specific counter-Shahed tactic, leveraging superior speed and a sufficient payload that doesn't just damage the target, but effectively destroys it.
Why the Shahed 136 is such a problem? Because it's not a very sophisticated drone.
Because of the sheer volume of targets entering our airspace, there was a point where we were unable to neutralize them all at once. That is why the Shahed drones became so successful and a relatively low-cost method. If you calculate the cost of the missile required to shoot down a drone versus the cost of the Shahed itself, the disparity is, of course, enormous.
When it comes to the system, Michael, so you've got the interceptor. What's the system that Gulf countries will need in order to have this effective counter capability to Shahed 136s?
Obviously, there is the detection system. In order to destroy a Shahed drone, first you have to find it. The second necessary step is, of course, the creation of mobile air defense groups. We have the bitter experience of our air defense being depleted. There was a point where the drone swarms were so large we simply couldn't shoot them all. But today, thanks to these specialized air defense groups, the situation has completely changed.
Now, some breaking news regarding the US-Israeli war on Iran. US Central Command has just announced the death of a 7th US service member in the country's military action against Iran. Posting on X, they say that last night a US service member passed away from injuries which were received during the Iranian regime's initial attacks across the Middle East. The service member was seriously wounded at the scene of an attack on US troops in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the 1st of March. This is the 7th service member killed in action during Operation Epic Fury, and they go on to say that major combat operations continue. The identity of the fallen warrior will be withheld until 24 hours after next of kin notification. So that breaking news that another American service member has died in the US-Israeli war with Iran, bringing the number of American troops killed in this conflict to 7. Any reaction?
Hello, I'm Karen Giannoni. It's day 9 of the US-Israel war with Iran, and over the next 10 minutes or so, we'll bring you our daily briefing with all you need to know and the key updates on the conflict. Iran appears to be getting closer to agreeing as new supreme leader to replace Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. State media says the Assembly of Experts has reached a consensus on a successor, but there hasn't been an official announcement. It comes as the US and Israel hit oil facilities in Tehran with intense aerial bombardment. Israel's president says bombing Iran is being done on behalf of the entire free world. Iran has fired another missile barrage towards central Israel. First responders say 6 people were wounded, and pictures show a blast hole in a street in Tel Aviv. We begin, though, with the state of the UK-US special relationship, which has taken a turn since the start of this conflict. In its latest development, Downing Street says Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to President Trump about the situation in Iran. Well, last night, the US president accused the UK of trying to join a war that he said had already been won. In a post on Truth Social, Donald Trump said the United Kingdom, our once great ally, maybe the greatest of them all, is finally giving serious thought to sending 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East. That's okay, Prime Minister Starmer. We don't need them any longer, but we will remember. We don't need people that join wars after we've already won. It came after one of the UK's 2 aircraft carriers was placed on advanced readiness and US bomber jets were seen landing at RAF Fairford. My colleague Nick Johnson is there.
These are B-1 bombers. They're some of the largest, heaviest, fastest bombers in the world. They arrived here yesterday. As part of that agreement from the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, he said the US forces can use this base as part of the Iran conflict, but for defensive measures only. We've seen other aircraft arrive here today as well. US military transport planes, they carry parts and munitions for the bombers. 2 of those planes arrived from an Air Force base in North Dakota, the same Air Force base where large B-52 Stratofortress bombers are based, suggesting that they might arrive at RAF Fairford in the coming days as well. RAF Fairford has a long history of partnership with the US Air Force. It's been used by the United States since the 1950s. It's also got one of the longest runways in the UK, coming in at just under 2 miles long, and it sits halfway, roughly, between the eastern seaboard of the US and the Persian Gulf, making it a strategic location for refueling and rearming.
Nick Johnson. Well, let's cross live to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. And Damien, how is the special relationship looking today?
Karen, it's a little bit rocky is how things look. I mean, I think you have to think there are 2 different levels of this. There is the level of the sort of military cooperation, the intelligence cooperation, the partnerships that operate on a day-to-day level. And the indications all are that those continue. And what you saw at that airbase in Gloucestershire is exactly that. The government's made that point. That's this happening in action. But at the level of leaders, well, then it's not great at the minute, you have to say. Those pretty tetchy, pointed, dismissive remarks from President Trump when the UK is looking at the possibility of sending an aircraft carrier, just, I think, illustrative of that. Now, Keir Starmer has spoken to President Trump today, their first call, interestingly, since the very start of the war, so in a week. And in a very kind of brief, terse statement from Downing Street, they said that the leaders discussed the military cooperation between the countries and the use of RAF bases in support of collective self-defence of countries in the Middle East. That's the key point, collective self-defence. That's what the UK is limiting cooperation to. That's why President Trump has been irritated. But what we've heard today from UK ministers, they are determined, they say, to take decisions in the UK national interest, not to outsource foreign policy. And that is, they say, all then the decisions are dependent on, is any action going to be lawful, and is it part of a thought-through plan? And the UK so far has not been convinced of that.
Damien, thank you. Iranians are waiting to learn the name of their new supreme leader after clerics from the assembly responsible for finding a successor announced they had made a choice. There is mounting speculation it'll be the son of the late Ali Khamenei, Mojtaba. Berang Tajdin from BBC Persian has more.
It's the 88 clerics of the Assembly of Leadership Expert who will choose the next supreme leader of Iran. But with the war raging and Israel threatening to target them, the members of the assembly have yet to formally meet in person. However, a couple of them have said that actually they have made a decision. And one has said that it is the same person that the great Satan, by which they mean the United States, has mentioned. That indicates that it could be Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of the late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. However, Mojtaba Khamenei has never stood for elections, held any public office, or even given a public speech. But if he is chosen, and that is a big issue right now, many expect him to pursue the same hardline policies and take the same positions as his predecessor and father, Ali Khamenei.
Oil depots in Iran were hit overnight by intense US-Israeli aerial bombardment, with locals reporting multiple explosions and a sky blackened with thick smoke. My colleagues at BBC Persian have received some messages from people inside Iran. We've voiced up their words.
Karaj was calm for a day, but now it has turned wild again. They have blown it up. Oil depot, Hisar and Baghestan areas. It was as if the night has suddenly turned into day.
The city is really covered in smoke. You can smell the burning. I can't see the sun. There is a horrible smoke. It's still there. I'm very tired. I've been indoors the whole time.
Well, for more on the impact the war is having on people living in the Middle East, the BBC's been speaking to the UN's humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher. He's described this as a moment of grave, grave peril.
Across the region, we're seeing an massive impact on civilians, hundreds of thousands displaced, needs rising very, very fast. But we're also seeing secondary impacts on places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, where needs were already great and where more people are being displaced. And then, of course, I have to worry about this as well. We're seeing all the other crises, South Sudan, Ukraine, slipping even further down the list. So I'm really worried at the moment.
A couple of other developments to bring you today. Lebanon's government says nearly 400 people have been killed in a week of Israeli strikes. Israel's massed forces along the border and repeatedly told people in southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut to evacuate. The Lebanese government says almost 500,000 people have registered as displaced since fighting began. A drone strike on a government building in Kuwait sparked a huge fire overnight. Attacks have been reported across the Gulf, with explosions heard in Abu Dhabi. The United Arab Emirates says it detected 238 ballistic missiles from Iran in the past week. Well, as we enter the second week of the US-Israeli war with Iran, where do things stand for the region and for the wider world? And where could this conflict be heading? Those are some of the questions people are searching most. And here with me to try to give us some answers, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. Hello to you, Lise. And first of all, has this gone the way the US expected?
Well, we don't really know what the U.S. expected, what Israel expected in the first week, because there were some reports that they believe that once they had assassinated the top cleric, Ayatollah Khamenei, in the very first salvos on that Saturday, February 28th, that the regime would collapse, which of course hasn't been the case. But what the Pentagon has been saying, and President Trump and his Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War as he calls himself, what they've been saying is that they're ahead of schedule, that they have made an extreme faster progress than they expected. They give the figures that more than 60% of Iran's ballistic missiles have been destroyed, that they have near complete control of the skies. And of course, they have killed dozens of top clerical and security officials. President Trump even admitted that some of the people they had in mind to replace the Ayatollah Khamenei had actually been killed. But the regime is still standing. There's been no defections and there's been no cracks.
Lots of people on TikTok asking, what is the plan heading into week 2? Do we know where this goes next?
Well, since President Trump really likes TikTok, maybe the TikTokers should ask President Trump, what do you really want, President Trump, when you have sent your country into war? He says different things, different days. First, we thought with his first statement on the early hours of February the 28th that he was calling on Iranians to rise up after the bombing was over. So people thought this is about regime change, bringing down the regime. Then he made it clear he wanted something like Venezuela. And I'm sure TikTokers and our viewers in general know what happened in Venezuela. They extracted the president, Nicolas Maduro. No American casualties, no chaos. President Trump had a say in who, or at least there's Delcy Rodriguez. He's working with her, and he in effect wants a Delcy Rodriguez type person that he can work with in Iran. He has said he wants to be involved in choosing the new leader, to which Iran said there is no possibility of that. And in fact, the system in Iran, layers and layers of security, ideological, political institutions, there's no way there will be a Venezuela situation in Iran.
Lise, thank you very much. Lise Doucette. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, BBC Sounds, radio or TV, thanks for being with us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today. Goodbye. Speak to Negar Mortazavi, who is a senior fellow at the Centre for International Policy. Thank you for being with us. What are your thoughts as we enter the second week of this conflict?
Well, first of all, talking about the civilian toll, I mean, it's a very horrific war. We're just getting these images trickling on the ground that some of them show really apocalyptic scenes of not just regime or military targets, but very much what looks like indiscriminate attack on civilian infrastructure. The civilian toll on the Iranian side is very high. It has already surpassed the June war, the 12-day war last year. In just 1 week, nearly over 1,000, nearly 1,500 civilians, many children included. One of the first targets was a girls' elementary school, one of the first places attacked on the first day of the war. So it's very concerning from the viewpoint of civilians on the ground. And then also, of course, civilians across the region, in Arab countries, across the Persian Gulf from Iran, which Iran sees as complicit or indirectly involved in the war, and then of course in Israel and now Lebanon. So it's just expanding, it's spreading, and I think most importantly the civilians are paying a high toll, which is very concerning.
I want to also get your thoughts on another aspect of what is going on inside Iran, the power structure, the move towards Iran's next supreme leader being announced. We don't have a name. We don't even know if that meeting has taken place yet, as our correspondent was just telling me. What do you think is going to come out of this?
Yeah, so the names being floating vary, from very hardline conservative figures. I mean, the son of the late Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, a hardline figure, supposedly maybe a favorite of the more militaristic hardline core of the regime, the Revolutionary Guards. And then you also hear names of more moderate figures. For example, your correspondent mentioned the former President Hassan Rouhani, who's certainly seen as a more moderate individual or figure within the political structure. It's not clear. We don't know who it is, but I think even the course of this war itself will determine not just the person that's coming out of this, but also essentially the policy direction of the country, especially vis-a-vis the West and the United States after this. This is for Iran a war of survival, of an existential battle for the Islamic Republic, and if they survive it at the end, I think this is going to determine their policies moving forward.
And among the names that are in the frame for the next supreme leader, is there much difference in what each might bring to a future of Iran?
I think so. I mean, as I said, it's a spectrum from fairly moderate to very hardline, and it depends on who comes. They will certainly bring that that side of the political faction with them. If it's a more moderate figure and from a more moderate camp with the support of that camp, that would mean one thing. If it's a more hardline conservative figure, that would mean another thing. And also, which camps can consolidate power within the country? This wasn't a one-man show. As we see, this show is still running because it's a state with very powerful institutions. It's repressive, it's authoritarian, but it also has very powerful institutions, and those institutions are running. The top brass was taken out, but it was very quickly replaced. They are the underdog in the war, but they're also fighting back, retaliating, and again, for an existential battle. So how this war is fought, how it's concluded, how far the attacks are going, I mean, even the rhetoric coming from the White House, from the U.S. president, is going to determine the future of this policy, but then also who can consolidate power as far as these institutions and who the supreme leader is and where they come from the political structure, I think is going to show us the path ahead.
Welcome, you're with BBC News, and let's bring you up to date with that breaking news that we brought to you in just the past half hour. We've been hearing that a 7th US service member has been killed. It happened in Saudi Arabia. US Central Command said that the service member passed away from injuries received during the country's military action action against Iran. Any more updates, of course, we'll get that to you, but that means that a 7th US service member has died in the US-Israeli war with Iran. It's the Central Command saying that last night a US service member passed away from injuries which were received during the Iranian regime's initial attacks across the Middle East, and our understanding is that the service member was seriously wounded at the scene of an attack on US troops in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on March the 1st. The name will be withheld until 24 hours after the family has been identified. Well, in further developments, Iran appears to be getting closer to agreeing a new supreme leader to replace Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the initial attacks by the US and Israel. State media in Iran says that the Assembly of Experts has reached a consensus on a successor, but there has been no official announcement. Well, a number of names have been suggested for the succession, and among those are Mujtaba Khamenei, son of Ali Khamenei. Also, there is Alireza Arafi, member of the Interim Leadership Council. Also, Sadiq Larijani, who's member of the Expediency Discernment Council. And Hassan Khomeini, who was grandson of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Also, Hassan Rouhani, former president of Iran. Now, the election of a successor comes as America and Israel hit key economic targets in the Iranian capital overnight, an airport and oil facilities in Tehran among them, as the war enters its second week. Israel's president says that bombing Iran is being done on behalf of the entire free world. Now, we're going to be hearing from our correspondents in the region shortly, but first, Joe Winward reports on strikes on Tehran.
They have turned night into day. That was how one Tehran resident described the result of last night's bombings. The US and Israel targeting Iran's oil industry in what seems to have been a concerted attack on the country's economy. Hassan was on his way to load up his truck when the first missile struck.
I turned the truck around on the street so it would be away from the danger. But then when they fired the first missile, two more struck right afterwards. The first one struck right over there. And then the gasoline started flowing towards the residential areas.
And this seems to have been the result. It said the oil ran into water channels and then ignited. Gasoline, according to the man filming says. Shops and homes are on fire. Israel has continued to release its own footage of this war, more sanitized than the view from street level. The country's president told the BBC that the war still has a clear plan.
What we are aiming for is very clear objectives. One, Iran cannot have nuclear capability, and they were rushing again to that capability. Number two, the long-range missiles. It's also a golden opportunity for the people of Iran to rise up and bring change. It's up to them.
This war is now taking place on two main fronts. As well as Iran, Lebanon has now been under sustained attack for 6 days. 4 people are thought to have been killed in a strike on an upmarket hotel in the capital, Beirut. Israel began its attacks on the militant group Hezbollah, a key Iranian ally, after they fired rockets and drones across the border. But, as ever, ordinary people get caught in the middle. The Lebanese Ministry of Health today claimed more than 80 children have been killed in the strikes. Around 500,000 have now been told to leave their homes.
The massacre took place at 6 a.m. in a 3-story building where 14 people were killed and 6 were wounded. We're used to it.
Across the Gulf in Kuwait, a high-rise tower burns amid waves of drone and missile strikes. Abu Dhabi and Israel were also attacked today. Iran's strategy is to spread the chaos to America's allies, putting diplomatic and economic pressure on the US. Today, the UAE released this footage of drones being shot down. Iran's top security official says his country would finish the war on their terms.
This can only be wrapped up when they understand that they no longer have the right to attack Iran, and when they compensate the Iranian nation for the damages. This disgraceful act they have created on the international stage carries a heavy cost. They assassinated the leader of Iran. The price for it will not be small.
This was probably the most devastating event of the war so far. A strike at a school in Mina in southern Iran, said to have killed more than 150, many of them children. Israel always denied responsibility. Early reports suggested the US was behind the attack. Previously, the Trump administration said it was investigating. But now, without providing any evidence, the president said this.
We think it was done by Iran. Because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
Back in Tehran, and as night turned to day, the smoke from the oil fires blocked out the sun. This war, started while diplomacy was still underway, has upended an already troubled region. The fires it started continue to spread. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Also, just to update you, the IDF has confirmed that 2 Israeli soldiers have been killed during the country's latest military offensive in Lebanon. Rora Davis has more from Beirut.
We've heard from the IDF, the Israeli military, tonight that 2 of its soldiers were killed in action fighting against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. That's after, of course, Israeli troops have re-invaded southern Lebanon in a bid to defeat and disarm Hezbollah in that part of the country. And they're firing rockets into northern Israel. Of course, there was a year-long war between Israel and Hezbollah, which only ended last year. And during that conflict, Israel was thought to have destroyed much of Hezbollah's military and personnel. It's pretty clear that Hezbollah has managed to retain men and weapons, and those Israeli troops now in southern Lebanon, although Israel says it has killed at least 200 members of Hezbollah and attacked 600 targets, there is still quite a serious and significant Israeli military operation happening in the south of the country. We've been across the country over the last couple of days, down in southern Lebanon today. And what's interesting is that there are dozens of Israeli airstrikes, not just in those exclusion zones south of the Litani River, this self-imposed exclusion zone. Israel says that people, all the civilians, hundreds of thousands of people, have to leave that area. But it's clear that a lot of the strikes are happening outside the exclusion zone. We were in the almost deserted town of Nabatea today, and we saw and heard dozens of airstrikes, including one less than 400 meters from the hospital where we were filming. Now, among the casualties today in Lebanon were 2 families of 20 people, again in the south, outside the exclusion zone. And it appears from speaking to people and from reports from the scene that these were 2 families who had left the area and gone further north. But because there are hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people now in Lebanon, they were unable to find accommodation, and they'd gone back to the south, as say reports. The building in which they were staying was hit in an Israeli airstrike. It's been a similar case in northern Lebanon. We were down in called Nabi Shit yesterday, where 40 people were killed in very heavy Israeli airstrikes and an Israeli land incursion by helicopter. It appears that today there were further Israeli airstrikes in and around funerals taking place in the town. And finally, here in the capital, Beirut, more Israeli airstrikes, not just on those Hezbollah strongholds of southern Beirut, but also on a hotel on the Beirut seafront. And this appears to have been a targeted strike on a particular room in a hotel. It's reported that there may have been some 4 people who were killed in that airstrike who may have had Iranian connections, but the details are still unclear.
Rora Davis there in Beirut, of course, the Lebanese capital. Now, as we've been hearing, a member of Iran's Assembly of Experts says that they have reached a consensus on who will replace the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. We don't yet know who that will be. That announcement hasn't been given, but there are a lot of names bandied about. Let's talk to Dr. Saivesh Ranjabardemi, who is senior lecturer at the University of St. Andrews, and you're an expert in Iran's political makeup. Now, that member of Iran's Assembly of Experts, the body that effectively votes on the next Ayatollah, said that Khamenei's name as Iran's leader will continue. Are you reading into that it will be the late leader's son, second son, Mujtaba Khamenei?
Well, that's the name that is being mentioned a lot in these hours as the successor to his father. As you said, there hasn't been an official announcement yet. There's a considerable amount of confusion. The deputy chair of the Assembly of Experts, the chair being, I think, incapacitated, has stated that soon there will be a report on the progress that the Assembly has made towards selecting the Supreme Leader, but hasn't really given a date. So it's still marred in confusion, despite the fact that some Assembly members, as you mentioned, have taken to the media and have stated that there has been a clear majority for a candidate, and have hinted at a strong continuity with regards to the slain Supreme Leader Khamenei.
This group of 88 predominant clerics, this panel assembly of experts, they say that some obstacles remain. What do they mean by that? What's your reading into that?
It could be procedural because of course, these 88 clerics are meant to meet in person. Their two buildings in Tehran and Qom have been bombed by the Israelis a few days ago. There is talk of doing it online, but apparently the legal procedures, the constitutional procedures do not actually allow this. There has to be some form of in-person confirmation. So it could be wrangling over procedure, or there could still be some divergence over whether really a vote has been held, because this could simply be the opinion of the majority rather than the binding vote, and how to announce it, of course, because of the threats made against the new Supreme Leader by Israel. Israel has pledged to pursue the new Supreme Leader, whoever that person will be, and of course the security lapses, and the security precautions which need to be taken.
So whoever it is, they need to have a proper ring of security around them, given that threat from Donald Trump and, of course, Israel as well. If it is the late Ayatollah's second son, what does this mean in terms of the way that the direction of travel will be for Iran? Because he's widely described as being the late Ayatollah's gatekeeper. He has a very close relationship with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. So arguably, it'll just be business as usual.
Well, on a few instances, the late Ayatollah Khamenei had stated that he was not in favor of a dynastic succession and not in favor of his son taking over, because that might bring back memory of the monarchy that the, of course, revolution of 1979 brought down. He never had a formal role and position within the office of the Supreme Leader, quite unlike the founder Ayatollah Khomeini's son Ahmad, who was actually his chief of staff. But Mujtaba Khamenei never had this role, but he was considered to be very close to his father. There were accusations that he interfered in two elections, presidential elections in 2005 and 2009, to steer them towards the of conservative candidates, particularly Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the controversial president. He is seen as the continuity candidate. He's seen to be very close to the current leadership of the IRGC and the parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. His relationship with the rest of the current surviving state systems, such as President Pezeshkian and the Supreme National Security Council head Ali Larijani, are very unclear. And he, as I said, has no track record of public office. So we have very little in terms of, say, or almost nothing in terms of public statements and speeches and even written articles to gain a view about his perspectives on world politics, on the economy, on Iranian society, on recent events such as the protests.
That's really interesting, Saibash. I just wonder, because we still don't know who it is. They've said that they've got someone, they've chosen someone, voted for somebody, but we don't know who it is. Just in terms of a name, in a sentence or two, if you would, just briefly. Dr. Hassan Rouhani, the former president, is he ruled out now?
Well, he would be probably the most suitable candidate from the moderate perspective. He has considerable amount of war and diplomatic experience, having been a senior official in the Iran-Iraq War, having negotiated the nuclear deal a decade ago. He would probably be somebody who would be chosen if the path was to go straight into negotiations with the United States. But he has been of course, on the sidelines of the political scene after the end of his presidency in 2021. So he could be a dark horse candidate, but he, of course, faces the opposition of probably the RGC leadership and more. But of course, until the name is confirmed, nobody should really be ruled out.
No, it's a really good point. Fascinating. Dr. Saybash Jabardemi, thank you so much for joining us, expert in Iranian politics and also from the University of St. Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. Now, the UN's humanitarian chief has warned of a growing civilian crisis across the Middle East 1 week into the US-Israel war with Iran. Speaking to the BBC's Laura Kunsberg, Tom Fletcher called for cool heads to prevail in the conflict.
This is a moment of grave, grave peril right now. We're seeing a lot of unintended consequences to this military escalation. And across the region, we're seeing an massive impact on civilians. Hundreds of thousands displaced, needs rising very, very fast. But we're also seeing secondary impacts on places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, where needs were already great and where more people are being displaced. And then, of course, I have to worry about this as well. We're seeing all the other crises, South Sudan, Ukraine, slipping even further down the list. So I'm really worried at the moment.
Strikes have already hit, homes, hotels, airports, all sorts of places that seem way beyond any kind of military targets. Do you fear that civilians actually are targets in this war?
Well, it's not clear whether civilians are being targeted, but it's clear that civilians are paying the ultimate price here, as always. And this is a time of brutality, it's a time of impunity, it's a time when I'm hearing that governments are spending $1 billion a day on this conflict. And this is money with which we could save millions of lives.
How difficult is it for you already to get aid to where it's needed? I mean, not least in Iran itself, where access is incredibly difficult.
This is a real challenge. Of course, we have teams on the ground in many of the key countries, Lebanon, Syria, in Gaza and the West Bank, and also Afghanistan, Pakistan, and elsewhere. We only have a very small team inside Iran, where, of course, a lot of the worst of the damage is taking place right now. I spoke yesterday to the Iranian ambassador in New York and offered again, as I offer to all the governments of the region, humanitarian support if it's needed. At the moment, we're being told that they don't need that external support. We're scaling up what we're doing for refugees inside Iran, but at the moment there isn't that request for us to come in and do more, but obviously I'm monitoring that hour by hour.
One of the things we've seen so far is an attack on a school. We don't know if it was deliberate or not, but what is the UN's view as we speak about who was responsible for that and whether it might be a war crime?
So the UN's view is protect civilians no matter what, full stop. Unequivocal. It's there in the charter. All countries have signed up to protect civilians. There must be a transparent, full investigation, and there must be accountability.
The European Union's asylum agency has warned that there could be an almost unprecedented wave of refugees coming from Iran and the region, and many people watching in the UK will therefore potentially have a concern about another wave of immigration. What do you think might happen, and more people being on the move?
So this is what I mean by the unintended consequences of this prolonged escalation, prolonged conflict. I think it's very easy to fire off huge amounts of expensive weapons. It's much harder to actually reflect on the long-term implications of that. And so you will see hundreds of thousands of people on the move, understandably. Wouldn't you move? Wouldn't I move if our homes and our schools and our hospitals were under attack in this way? And my concern is, yes, that will create further tensions across the region and beyond, and will further fuel polarization and extremism and the sort of politics that actually leads to more conflict. We are seeing right now this sustained attritional attack on the rule of law, on the institutions like the UN that are designed to prevent this kind of conflict. We've all got to take a deep breath. We need cool heads to prevail. We've got to step back from the brink right now.
But is anybody going to listen to that call when you have an American president who said publicly, I don't need international law? When you have Iran having ignored the pleas of the international community for years and years? Is anyone listening to the United Nations?
I fear they're not listening as much as I wish they would. We're in this sort of strongman moment right now, muscular geopolitics, people resorting far too soon to weapons, guns, warfare, rather than these institutions that we've built up with patience and at such cost, because after the Second World War, we realized the danger to common humanity if we don't have these places where we can actually settle our differences peacefully. Right now, we're not being heard, we're not being listened to. Our job is to keep shouting loudly, to keep speaking truth to power, and keep demanding protection of civilians and accountability for those behind the violence.
What would your message be to the UK Foreign Secretary this weekend?
My message to the UK Foreign Secretary, as to all governments, is stand up for international law, back humanitarian action, back our efforts to reach the hundreds of thousands of people who need help right now, in addition to the millions globally who we're already trying to reach, and try to bring people back to the table, try to bring people back to consensus and to the institutions that were built to prevent wars like this.
The head of the UN's humanitarian mission speaking to Laura Kuenssberg. Now, Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump had a phone call this afternoon in which they discussed military cooperation. The conversation came after President Trump added to his criticism of the Prime Minister's decision not to join the initial strikes on Iran by suggesting that the US no longer needed the naval ships that Britain is poised to send to the region. Here's our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, now a staging post for US aircraft to and from the Middle East. The Prime Minister and the US President discussed this military cooperation in their phone call this afternoon. Street said, for the preemptive defence of the UK's partners in the region. Donald Trump has taken offence at Sir Keir's decisions, including the news the UK is preparing an aircraft carrier for possible deployment.
We don't need them. It's not the right time. It would have been nice to have had them 2 weeks ago.
Mr. Trump was also offended that Sir Keir did not agree to let US planes use British bases in the opening salvos of the US war on Iran. The Foreign Secretary was asked about this souring of relations.
It's for the US President to decide what he thinks is in the US national interest, and that's for him to do. But it is our job as the UK government to decide what's in the UK national interest. And that doesn't mean simply agreeing with other countries or outsourcing our foreign policy to other countries. We have to be able to take those decisions.
A Labour Prime Minister who did go along with the US President, Tony Blair, who joined George Bush's 2003 invasion of Iraq. That decision was highly controversial. Over a decade later, an official inquiry said the case for war was not justified, there was no imminent threat, and the plans for the aftermath were wholly inadequate. Mr. Blair is now part of Trump's Gaza Board of Peace. In a private speech in the US on Friday, he said the UK should have backed America from the beginning in this war too. They were asking us to use our bases for refueling. It's not like Vietnam. It's not like as we did in Iraq, sending in thousands of British troops, he said in remarks reported by The Telegraph and The Mail. If they're your ally and they're an indispensable cornerstone of your security, you better show up.
Having been a minister in the last Labour government, I also think it is important to learn lessons from what went wrong in Iraq.
Those lessons, Keir Starmer says, are to decide whether any action is lawful and part of a properly thought-through plan before the UK joins in.
That's what Keir Starmer has been doing. And I think he's right to stand up for Britain and Britain's interests.
Meanwhile, the destroyer HMS Dragon, which is being deployed to protect Cyprus and the British base there, may leave in the next couple of days. Final preparations are still being done.
That warship that's still parked in Portsmouth costs British taxpayers £1 billion. It can't get to sea, it can't get welders and spare parts. They're sat on the equipment programme, and they have been for some time. They have got to start taking it seriously.
Reform UK say our ships should have been deployed already. British pilots should not be involved in attacks on Iran.
For us to be deploying British airmen in bombing raids over Iran right now, when our allies have not asked us to do that, then no, I don't think that's necessary. We shouldn't be endangering British personnel unnecessarily.
Keir Starmer has invested much in trying to build a relationship with Donald Trump, but the decisions this war has presented mean it's already on shaky ground. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
And Damien gave us some more analysis on that call between Donald Trump and Sir Keir Starmer.
With these things, you always kind of have to read between the lines because the official readout, as it's called, from Downing Street was pretty brief. And that in itself tells you something, I think. I mean, they're not usually very verbose, but this one simply said that the two leaders had this call this afternoon, that they discussed the military cooperation, which involved the UK bases.
أنا زي كبنا في جزاين وسبعي داون تقبل ولا أفكرني أنا في جزاين كتقطع مقنعته يجي أنا زي كبيرة في جزاين وسبعي زي تقفن بس زي ما كنت حتى والله يقبلي أكيد السبعي داون تقبل دي قال كنا في جزاين فكرني أنا مقنعته زي صوته زي أمسي سقيدهم كم يدرس شغلتي كنا كم تقدر كل جزء زورة تعدي قم مسيو سبعي ده حد سبعي تومس زي ده تتقون هتقول أي ده እንተዘይኮንኩም እዚኦም ደሞ ሰውት ቁፅሩ እዚኦም ደሞ ሓዳር ክገብሩልና ኣለዉ ድዮም ሰውት ትብል ጓል ግን ኣነ ይፈቱኒ አንቀኸ ማለት ጌጋ እሳቶም እንኮም ንዓስኻቶም ኢላ ክትብል ዘለኻ ጓል ዲኻ ወዲ ብርኩ ዘርኢ ንዓስክእቶ ስለዚ ኣነ ኣይደልኒ መፅያ ሓንቲ ጓል ንሓደ ወዲ ንስኻ ሰብኣይ ዲኻ ሰውት ኣለዉ ድዮም ኣብዚ ገዛኻ ቴራ እዚኦም ሰውት እዮም ካበይ ዳ መፅኦም እዚኣቶም ካብቶም ወለድና ዲኮኑ ተወሊዶም ኣነ ሰብኦም ወሊዶም እየ ዝብል ስለዚ ዘይከውን ዘራ ክዛራ ከሎ ይሓርቕ ኣለኹ እሱ ይምበር ካልእ ምንም ፀገም የለን ብትክክል ከማ ከመፂኹም ተሓቲትክ ግን ይቕበል እየ ዮርዳ ኣብ ግብፂ እያ ዘላ ብሩኻይ ግብፂ እያ ዘላ ማይ ክልተ ቆልዑ ኣለውኒ ፕሮሰስ ክዝናበ ዮርዳ ዓይኒ ናትኪ
ንኣውስትራልያ
ፕሮሰሰይ ንኣውስትራልያ እዩ ፕሮሰሳስ ንኣውስትራልያ እዩ ስለዚ ንኣውስትራልያ ፕሮሰስ ኣለኒ ትብለኩም ኣላ نحرنا نوردان دلينا تبتخنكم كديو تخولي خبرخات حرايرة سلام سلام زم دك ايكو عدا حان مساخم ديوكم زلخم كلتيخم حاجريت بزلخان ابزلخ من يزلت شي كاز ودي ناي بيني تزلخ بروخي سلام سلام بكم عدا حان مساخ حاجريت بزلخ كاز ودي بروخ مسخاكم عاري بزل لخ خيت زاد بنتي خدا سلام نعوذ أخي تقبل عليه كذا ويلك حاري نعود حاري سلام سلام قاعد حد تخبرك زر اسخ عبد الزرع لولي دعتكم كيف تمدانا بيكيت كزغلو كندليل كن عدا يبغن دي صحيفه مولي عندو العتواصبي واضح هاي يمكن معي عواتي تنك الورديبو ممبر كون كان يترفس ممبر ونفس ممبر حنت خند حنت في يريا ممبر كون زندك نايلو دفع انا جيركم يا تماري نايلو بتي لولي بزيد اللي زي كده يجيب زيد مالك نايلو عد معاه 3 كلتين عد معاه 3 كلتين قومته مثلا عن 3 امنتاته هذا النروية تقمط كاب 35 كساب 4 زكون عد مو تقمط اي نروي مجمريا النروية عمل يصعب فريقن صايغميلن ولا اوروبا خون قلنا لا اخي خيد زي خير مخنياتو دسا سرحه كتقير سبزي تخناتا سرحه قوام سبزونه معناتي سلازي كم اتدريون عديو ناي نروي تقمط فلاي نروي تقمط عدمها خاف 35 كساب 4 زكونكا الصور 30 كلتن عامتي حدا راي نبرا ولادون يبلان سلازي نعم تننلو اللي تدريو ناي مش بخا انا يوردا خا عدم 4 و235 امنتات وحدو أبز خوني يكون عدم خن داخل كنا زيادة كأربع 5 ديو يوردي
هو ما عرف دتين هو حاجة خلقي
4 زكون عدمو
و4 شوعة تنقل عنه
الحين 4 عدمو إلاتكم هذا يوردا خطقوا اللون اليوم بروسس كعلنينا أستراليا تقولكم هذا سلازي أستراليا دم يكون تودد أمون أستراليا تكون كده أمون أو أستراليا زنبري خوم زلون بس
إيه تترقي ولا
أستراليا زلون بنياتوزي خوم يخوم زلون أستراليا زلون نايلو اللي خاصة العقم نايلو اللي سيقعد مع 3 كلتاني قومتها 270 امنتاتو هذا النروية تقمت كاف 35 كسار عزقون كتقمت أي نروي ناي نروي عندكم ده ناي نروي تقمتو عيت دلي قطعي تاب غور زندقي لعل زلهم تاب غور بروخات تاب غور نيتورك حزنا مخنياتو سمستاكل نيتورك حزني تاب غور بروخات زندقي واتساب ካብዞም ኩሎም ሞዴሬተራት ዝመጽ የለን مش بجካ ፍረናይ ብራዘር የለን ማዕልትና ከም ዝኻደ ተማል ኮነ ገርና የርኢ ግን ኣነ እምበር መን ኣለ ብታሕቲ ዳ ኣብዚ ገዛይ ሞዴሬተር ዘለዎ ኩሎም ደቂሶም ዲዮም የለውን ኩሎም ቶም ዋው አለ ባ ዲጄ አብሪሽ ሞዴሬተር አለካ ዲጄ አብሪሽ ሞዴሬተር ተዲክ حግዘኒ ኣዋል ተሊን ገለ ደይበለይ ቴንክ ዩ ማን ወደይ ብሩክ ማዓሪ أودات تخونكم أودات يكون فندريز أودات كرتلو ديو ما دو حجي أوالد يخون تتيجي أوالد
أنا شارد بالكم أسيبه كوي
إتوتو زي اللي خاقن قوالي يكون كان ودي خا مخنياتو ناي قوال سيد غير كات لخا سلازي ناي قوال سيد زغير خا زغزاي كتيجي بايدي ود خون ناي ود سيد زغير يزدي نعتمد قبور خات كرتي خو تاب قبور با أبزي أسكن ديالهم سلسة بيت العسران شو من سبات هذهم تاب قبور زندقي تاب قبور نعبروخ نعتمد قبور هاجري حلال تبزل خنا عتبز قبروخ
الشيء
ماني شمكة سامي هذا يزودي أنا ما سامي
مسرح شو عته
هذا قومت كها
براسيت ماسكين
يترسوا على حمشة
أمنت كها زودي
وهذا
هذا أبي خاط قمت سامو برو
براسيت تراويل
جوا
أنت إرمياس تاخذ كعصر تجزي أنا إرمياسي منتهي كبر بعرف فلوتوني أمنت كاتو هذا أبي تقمت جيجا يقوم يبهلني تركب أبي تقمت
جوا يا
أنا إرمياسي ما استوعب
ولا أفريقيا ولا أوروبا
هاي نعنو نقصد نعم علي ودي ماني خاطر زل خبر خنيت تقول راح جتين يمكن معاري 200 مرات كنت زل خاز ودي ممبر كون اسكن زعف زل لكم 350 ممبر كون اسكي ممبر كون خك انت حنت في جيرسكي ممبر كون أكاد قدر مع ممبر عنده سلام بروخ زري ممبر كون زمدك بروخات يبقى زمدك ودي معنا أتبع يمان تزل خبروخ ممبر كون ممبر حنت في يري أكو خدت حنت في يري تبنزل خلنا زي أعطين كيفك ممبر كون زال بقرصتين كيفك بروخي يلا زودي يرضى عيني يرضى أنا سي معاري يلا زودك ممبر كون تاب جبرو ريبوست جبرو نفس من انتخابات ثانك معاري نب سب من انتخابات ريبوست حنت تجي ريبوست أي تتقوم وتريبوست شيء سب من انتخابات عارف عيني مرة ترى لك ديو
كتير جايبين من حوالي ثانك يو عارفة
ثانك يو ماني معي أولي خد خلنا ممبر كم يوم أنا ممبر كنا زمدك جوزات كلها كنا زي 340 تعلقوا ممبر كنا ريبوست حنت جيزي سم انتخابات حنت جيزي ريبوست جور سوي تأكد يبلك كنتي خارس عين عقبك زيادة حجزني زي أخوك يلو وانتم قالوت أولدي خافت قصة تسحب ليش زيادة
قبل ما أنا تصحب بالكي
عبت حتى كنت أقول ما كنت تسحب زلك يا
هرايش ورنش حابين ما
فكي زيادة أول بلوك قالك عايز تجبر يا أخي شيء ولا بيتكم ولا تمزج تعرفوا من يريد ولا على دي أريده سأريد من أريد كفر عيني على دي أريده من يسكت زلوا أبلع تحت قوي من سقيلك عبد حوي سلام أبي.
أنت اللي تاني موس ترى نا إذا أنا بوتا خسائر تسوي خور
لغديش قريب. ودي سحل برازري مصيلة. welcome بك ودي سحل مصيلة. ودي سحل كأني حق زكي أص عينيشي. ودي سحل كلي حاجة. نحن قاعد حن مسأخة أب حوي. نحن تسأجني ونقعد تسأل كأجن سمعك كأيده حن حسب قدر خير الوكالين. إحنا برنامج جميل رسل الزلقي.
أنا سلك تدافعنا سلر أنا خير نمرك سلام قبل اللي ديب.
حرّي حوي معري سلام كذا هو صراحة جميل رسل الزلقي برازري سورشي ود.
أوكي.
حرّي معري بتعمل إذا مسكنتين في برازري. أولد هذا يقولي ود سحل برازري مس أرسخنكم. أولد. فرعيني كهيبة كلهم مديرة الحق زي جمشي. أولد يهم تدي يقولي. أولد. أفتي قص زين أنا بتعيز بهال زي بلا بعدك سحركم صار حجب زي لحن صارت. أيوة. عودة تديون. عودة تديون لي. أجلس ودي. عودة تديون. روسياوي قدر سويت أتولي نقدر عودة تسحب لي. سلام سلام نعتذر تمسجم معك بس إذا تحدد عندك هذا
أنا بمسجم بسري هلو أسمي كله عندك اسمي كله أنا بعد
نعتذر
يا إلمو سلام نيجا ويتعنا
سلام تاب بورد دقي أنت استميت سنة
سمي سالت بال
تاب بورد
سالت بال سمي يا
هذا تغلط علمك عندي تغلط
ثلاثة حمشتن ثلاثة شدشن
ثلاثة شدشن ثلاثة حمشتن
وقريبا له ثلاثة شدشن خوي ماتي
ثلاثة شدشن هذا قد ما خذ ثلاثة شدشن قومت كخبر خوي
280
هذا امنت كخ 100 قرص خبز أتحب
كريستيان
تقول دقيقة بس زلدك معري وعريا قتل كذا 100 قريو هذا امنت كاتو هذا حري ابي عدي خاتقمت تخلي
لوكسمبورغ
ابي لوكسمبورغ مالت
بس تبع الجرماني تبع الفرنسا اوروبا اشتري
عم تقمت عندنا اخاك كندي كاوسا كندي تخوت حد تاب قبور يوردا هذا رايت الزلخه ودت الزلخه تاب قبور الزلخه بملو تاب قبور
تاب 20 شدشن سبع 4
20 شدشن صعب 30 شدشن ندي حق اللي جرى 30 شدشن سبع 4
ولا 4 تعمل تبيني شكل من هانستري انا سمع عليك عبيني العداوه
انت
ولا 4 تعمل تبيني
ما اعرف نسيهم تسفقوري انا كقول
قهوه تادي جزاو سن سايت تتقم دم ناي مصاي نابرا موعد هيوت كتمسرتولو تخيل سؤال اللي حنقوله في اللي حوي معك
الحين قد فعل بحوي تقدش نام اخو تقدر حد
باش نزرب يا اوريدي تايدي جيرمان تونك حد عين قنقينا نزرب انا سويجي زار سويجي زنق
انا دازنا داخل لنا يخداني رن مالتي
صندوق مناطر النيم بمجال
طوش على البيو تعرف لا طوش حج على توبا خيده طوش مسجبر كوسي ما زال مرتين نقطة تغيرام داري وش تغني بقى فوسي زي لك تكون انا قصدي
نقطة تغير ده
نقطة تغيرام ده حتى الناس تقول لك خذي لك خلينا نرى تنكر لا لا حنقول
هجي نذهب للإخوات كم زبركم نفسها مرتكب قبل لك تقدس انك تعمل سبوي جينا منك مسك تحوس مكلها سب ولا عندك يبلكان جن سب كما دريو تريت الله بقى تايو زي قلب شر ولا قال كنا حجنا منك ود خوينو نفسه ايرو ولا تريم ولا عاوز ود دسك بلكا كلانو وإذا قال دسك بلكا فرق حدر لك اين حدا سب سرين حري خايو فرق حدر لك حدا سب جن شيلو هم قال عين من حكينو كم يجيك حوالات مشارم كم زي ولا عنه يقول نجرس فدر لك حاجة تايو مور نفسها علم كلها مور نفسها تكون كلها حما نقدر يكون you know نفسنا مرة مور كل فتوى لنا نفسنا كيف نقبر لنا كومون يسمعنا أنا هجتايو نقول لنا أنا مالت كابهم فليت ليكم كان جس كل شيء أبوت أهلنا كندا أهلنا أبي أوروبا لنا نفسنا خنا العلا لنا كلنا نكير لنا is very important كم رين قبر نحكينا ولا حتى أنا هجيك كلنا كير كل حويلة بقى خمسة شنو قد قبر لي سبورت هيكركم كلنا كير كل حويلة شنو قد قبر لي سامبت أيوتني أو جزانا وين بونا ستيم سمازر كنوت نحدلنا داون تاون قال هاي نزاول حجي داون تاون كنا بونا نسودنا هم طالع ملح مالتي نزاول قال نيم شد قال كذا بارك لو ولا ريستوران قال هاي دس لنا مالتي حجي تناي سنبت تستمر لك تي وسك تستمر لك أيكا ولا تسأل دس لك لكن نبز هنا نبز وتتأكد دس لك لو تنحدي لك أول شيء جنبت تمو لو تنحدي لك what do you want to do like it's not worth it سبكون نحدي تسألي عن نفسها نحدي لكم كاكو قربك أكيد قال كنا نفسنا نحدي تسأل خنا حلو ودك فتوات ودو خينو نفسنا نحدي تسأل خينو قالوا ممكن فتوات خني حكي تاني كل شيء عليك السبب كنا نفسنا مورتيكر قبل لنا is very important هذا مجلسي إناي like you know نفسنا تسألت هريبتنا مجلسي إناي بيدو بوتي لو هم تريد لحاول هذه بقول حسب ذا نعاون نسجلون هم تريد له بيدو صرح لكم بيدو كسرح يا يا زي أنا كنت أقول نسي دي شامبو كنت أنا نفسي دي شامبو دي ناي بلاك هير لكن تقولوا بلاك جوبر لك خمدي لهون شورح كم زوجين خلاص كلمة عمله نوحي بتسن حجانا لم تلي جايس أنا كلمة عمله لك نزتي وزلهم تسليم حبر زلهم قومي لهون شورح وحي تسنح ولا حتى إنفكت زبان نقدر يقوله أنا من بعلي زويل كمان زويل أسألي موت حمي حجي قال لي سبتة مسلو قال لي خليني نقول بقى ميلا كنت تقول لي هذا لو النسبات كنت تاب قبورو زندك أي تاب يللو ما أنت زحيركم علىهم بونا سلفان حدا شيء حدا صاحبي 5 شيء لعل زلهم تاب تقورو دلهم يريقكم علىهم بزخر لعل زل ذكر يخلي تحت زل إنبر لعل زلهم يورد تاب قبري هاجري تاب قبر وديت بزلها تاب أب حول من تاب قبر بخزري والعرايا كلها تكون تاب قبور عرفت تاب قبور ممبر كون
ناتي راكلنا عند قبرنا اللي وصلنا نتوصل لهم
حري برازري حري بيتو ما يبدعني زين السجن ودي بروح قدنا نتقناني
بركة يا ولد باي كيس ماركا قبورة توديها Thank you, Tabati. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tabati. Happy. Oh, na karot ya. Ziana ko ziana ini saya. Zia, دقنا تايم. واحد ثاني. حجان كابس تزقبر نير نجحمي. كده أنا مرت لكم اللون. صوروا روم مثلاً. زي أنا أورجانيك يدتكم. لو أنا نقدر يدتكم يا مالتي. زياد فيديو سريع له هو اخوات زياد نحدد له فيديو سريع لهم فيديو نايت اكتروبات خلوه
هذا بس نكون يقولوا نقص ስለዚህ አለው ወደ ስብራ
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. However, Mujtaba Khamenei has never stood for elections, held any public office, or even given a public speech. But if he's chosen
And that is a big if right now. Many expect him to pursue the same hardline policies and take the same positions as his predecessor and father, Ali Khamenei.
Farang Tajdeen from BBC Persian. Well, Dr. Saivesh Ranjabardemi is a senior lecturer at the University of St. Andrews. Also, he's an expert in Iran's political makeup. And he spoke to me a little earlier about whether the late Ayatollah Khamenei's son, Mujtaba, could succeed him.
That's the name that is being mentioned a lot in these hours as the successor to his father. As you said, there hasn't been an official announcement yet. There's a considerable amount of confusion. The deputy chair of the Assembly of Experts, the chair being, I think, incapacitated, has stated that soon there will be a report on the progress that the Assembly has made towards selecting the Supreme Leader, but hasn't really given a date. So it's still marred in confusion.